New York's harbor is as large as it is complex. Rich with history and maritime tradition, it once served as the nation's gateway for thousands of immigrants to New York. Today, it is home to 6 container terminals and is the largest port on the East Coast. It's an industry that supports thousands of jobs. From the longshoremen that work the docks,
it'll take around maybe 8 or 9 hours, but in the end, you got the job done.
to ship pilots and tugboat captains.
Right now we got 4 tugs on this job. So if he needs to stop the ship, we can stop the ship, or we can try.
And the Coast Guard charged with protecting these waters.
That's our goal, is to instill predictability throughout the harbor. We don't want chaos. Occasionally it pops up in here and there, but it's our job to kind of squash it.
At all times, the Coast Guard has visibility of how that vessel is coming in and where that vessel is going and how long they will be in the port.
In the nearly half a century since containers made their way onto New York's docks, the ships that carry them have gotten bigger. Repeat dredging projects and bridge construction have allowed these larger ships to enter the port, and the work is far from done. Here's how New York moves millions of containers through its harbor each year. The seaport has been vital to the economic growth of New York City since before the U.S. existed. It made the city the primary spot for commerce and immigration. Today, the harbor's busiest port is actually in New Jersey, the same place the modern shipping business was born.
The first time a cab of a truck got loaded onto a ship was Malcolm McLean, who had a trucking company, McLean Trucking. He was always struck by sort of the inefficiency of shipping because it wasn't unitized. It was basically all loaded and unloaded very manually, very labor-intensive, very slow. And containerization unitized all that into these cargo containers.
These simple, standardized containers proved to be as revolutionary for shipping as the assembly line was for the auto industry. The first ship to bear them, the SS Ideal X, left from Newark on April 26, 1956, bound for the Port of Houston with 58 cargo trailers on deck. The voyage would change trade forever and reshape New York and the world. Half a century after McLean's invention, about 60 million containers pass through the world's ports each year. Today, 7.4 million TEUs, that's 20-foot equivalent unit for those without their sea legs, make their way through New York's waters. And just what is a TEU?
A TEU is a 20-foot equivalent, so 2 TEUs equal 1 40-foot container.
New York and New Jersey's container facilities are arguably some of the most critical pieces of infrastructure in the city.
Over the last 2 years alone since I've been here, the amount of containerized cargo has grown exponentially. Tens of thousands little boxes on these container ships. It's always a question of what's in them.
Today we are doing a HIV boarding or a high-interest vessel boarding. It's going to be out at an anchorage. It's off the coast, about 6 miles or so. We're just inspecting for safety before it comes into the port of the U.S.
Ships are boarded, usually out in Ambrose Channel, just outside the Narrows. This is the staging area for all container vessels making their way into the port.
So the Coast Guard employs what we call a layered security strategy, which starts well before the ships ever get underway. A ship, when it's coming in, is required to submit what we call an advance notice of arrival, where up to 96 hours in advance of that ship coming into port, they're required to tell the Coast Guard, Customs Border Protection that they're coming in, and Coast Guard and CBP conduct vetting of that vessel, and they look at crew, cargo manifests, and determine whether there's anything we believe is a threat on that ship.
We want to make sure that it's safe for it to come into port for the safety of everybody around in the maritime domain. Yeah, we do that. We do it pretty frequently, yeah. That's about probably all they'll let us tell you about.
All this traffic is managed at the sector's Vessel Traffic Service on Staten Island. This is one of 12 operated by the Coast Guard at the country's busiest ports. On average, more than 60,000 ships will make their way in and out of the port each year, including roughly 12,000 cargo ships.
Our watch starts at 5:30 in the morning. We run 12-hour shifts. These vessels, they will essentially start in about 3, 4 in the morning to be at the dock for 6 for labor to start. Labor is going to be longshoremen and so on. We're getting larger and larger ships coming through here. So these ships have restrictions, tide windows that they kind of have to make their way through the port at. So we're looking to make sure that these ships are coming in when they should be coming in, when they can be coming in. It's actually very organized. You know, we take a huge part in that. Like, that's our goal, is to instill predictability throughout the harbor. What we don't want is anyone to be surprised by anything that they're going to see.
Critical to moving a ship from harbor to port are a small army of tiny but mighty tugboats.
This is my beautiful view, right? I wake up every morning, look at this. Nothing better than this.
Captain Jose Rosas has been towing ships in the New York harbor for almost 3 decades. He works for McAllister Towing and Transportation, which has been pulling, tugging, towing, and pushing ships with its fleet of more than 75 boats down the East Coast for more than 150 years. All container vessels coming into New York's port must be brought in by tugboats. Container ships that rival the size of most skyscrapers need a little push or tug to help them navigate New York's waters. In 1929, there were more than 700 tugs working in the congested harbor. Modern tugs are fast and have incredible maneuverability.
The way that the boat is operated, the drive units actually turn, so the propellers can do a 360-degree radius, and that's what allows the captain or whoever's driving the boat to be able to maneuver so well.
That comes in handy when guiding today's larger ships into the harbor. The 2 engines of this tug combined produce about 6,700 horsepower.
So I can turn this boat, I can walk this boat sideways, whatever direction I want it. The rope, we call it a ship line, and it's our tool. Whatever we do on ships, it depends on that line.
This ship is going in on its own power. Right now, as an escort, we are just making sure that if there was anything wrong with the ship's power, the ship's steering, or if they couldn't make a turn fast enough or something like that, we can push on them, we can pull on them, we can slow them down if they're going too fast. It would be a very costly mistake if something were to go wrong. It's basically it's an insurance policy. We help them to get into the slip. We help them turn around when they can't turn around because it's too narrow, stuff like that.
After a ship passes through the Narrows, it's most likely headed here, the port of Newark. But first, it needs to maneuver through this infamous 3-mile-long, 1,000 feet wide stretch of water.
So all these ships have to go through there to get where they need to get. The Kill Van Call is kind of the critical waterway that we have here, because your major container terminal is up in here, Port Elizabeth and Port Newark. So all of that traffic has to go through this waterway into here. It's a very narrow waterway, but it's critical for us because, again, that's where everything goes through.
It consists of 3 key turns, one into the strait, another out, and finally a turn into Port Newark itself. Without these tugboats, ships would be unable to make it. It's a trip that's getting increasingly difficult. Since Malcolm McLean introduced the idea of container ships, the ships themselves have grown at an enormous scale. Today's ships are far bigger than their ancestors from the 1950s. While older ships could accommodate 6 bays across, newer ships run 24 across. Some ships even rival the heights of New York's tallest buildings. From 2013 to 2019, the Bayonne Bridge was raised from 151 feet to 215 feet, allowing larger ships to enter.
To us, a container is a container is a container. We're a niche terminal. We're very important because we're in the heart of New York City. So a big percentage of the cargo that comes off of the services that we work here in Brooklyn go directly into New York City or the 5 boroughs.
Red Hook Container Terminal in Brooklyn is smaller than its contemporaries in New Jersey, but it operates in much the same way.
We wear a lot of different hats, and that's what I love about it. I worked over in one of the big terminals for 20 years of my career, and then I switched over here about 4 years ago now, and we may not have 10 ships a week, but you still got to do that same concept for that one ship you have. So today what will happen is, at 1 o'clock we're going to commence operations. The gantry cranes will go over the vessel, and we'll start unloading the containers. We're going to take those containers, mount them up on yard hustles. They're going to drive through our customs portal, then they'll get placed in the yard. The truckers will start picking those boxes up, and out the gate to the consumer they'll go.
All this work is done by a small army of longshoremen.
I have a good, solid team, a small team. Our ILA workforce here in Brooklyn is second to none.
Today, more than 3,300 longshoremen and women work across New York and New Jersey.
You could go from 400 containers, split it in half, one crane 200, this crane 200. It'll take around maybe 8 or 9 hours.
Richard Salazar got the job through a veterans employment program and has been working here for 6 years.
Sitting in a seat for 5 hours can take a toll on your back, but in the end, you got the job done. Like you helped assist in this process.
How we move around the world has changed greatly in the last century. Planes have replaced ships in both personal and commercial travel. But speed costs money, and container ships are still far more practical.
It is really critical because of how much comes through here as far as containers are concerned. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much comes in on containers. Everything. And, there's like interconnectability to everything because now all those containers, they get offloaded, they go on either trains, they go out west, as far as the Mississippi River.
Container ships will continue to get bigger, but that kind of growth will always require people. No matter the challenge, it's the workers, the pilots, longshore men and women, ship captains, and the Coast Guard who work to keep this system running.